Hey, loves, welcome back to Confidently Cherished. And we have a special guest here today, Allison Dagney. And Allison, I really want you to introduce yourself and tell us about what it is that you do.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am just so happy to be here. I want everyone to know that I am an author of a book called When Tears Leave Scars. And I wrote this book because I am also a survivor of more than 20 years of what I believe to be narcissistic abuse by a covert narcissist. I met this person when I was very, very young at 19. And throughout my marriage, and then we had 3 kids together, I just felt like everything was my fault. And I felt like that every problem that we had was because of me, and there was something wrong with me. I was crazy. I was something, I had emotional problems, or something wasn't right. I knew something wasn't right, but I believed it was me. So I wrote the book because when I finally became aware of what was happening to me and realized that it was an abusive situation, I knew that I had to write this book to help other people, because I felt like that I couldn't possibly be the only person out there that was feeling like this, that there were probably other women and men too who are in long-term relationships and marriages and were just feeling this immense suffering day in and day out, but then also were shouldering the blame for everything. And so once I realized that this was a problem and I finally made my way out of the relationship, I made it my mission to expose this and to help other people with inspiration, with hope that there is a way out. And after that happened, I let my pathway just led me into coaching. And I do what is called subconscious reprogramming. And that methodology is the only thing that helps me to heal. And now I'm helping other people in that same way. So that's sort of how my story started. And really, it's not ended yet. And I am just happy to be here to share all of this with your listeners and for you today.
Let's talk about your book is called When Tears Leave Scars, and you help women with toxic relationships, narcissistic relationships,
Yep.
recovering from those. And I noticed when you said that toxic and narcissistic,
Yes.
because I feel like, especially on social media nowadays,
Mhm.
everyone is a narcissist. Everyone who's hurt someone's feelings is a narcissist.
Yeah.
How do you feel about all the content you're seeing on social media? Because I feel like on one hand, I appreciate the awareness. On the other hand, like, I constantly have clients coming to me like, I think my mother was a narcissist, my father was a narcissist, my ex-boyfriend was a narcissist, and like, maybe, but
Right. Well, and you're absolutely right. The reason it's become so popular, especially on social media, is because people want to understand and make sense of things that don't make sense. So being able to label someone who's treating you in a really horrible way as a narcissist really helps people identify something that was unidentifiable. And what I have learned over the course of the last few years is that by labeling everyone a narcissist, then nobody's a narcissist. It dilutes it all. And really does a disservice to people who are truly suffering from narcissistic abuse. And there is something out there, which you're probably familiar with, the DSM-5, which has all of the 9 criteria that you must have. Well, you have to have 5 of the 9 criteria to be actually diagnosed as a narcissist. So in my particular situation, my ex was not diagnosed as a narcissist. The problem with narcissism in general is that they don't ever think there's anything wrong with themselves. So they would never go say, hey, can you check me out and see if I have narcissistic personality disorder? They're just not going to do it because they're thinking in their brain, I'm perfect. There's nothing wrong with me. You're the one that needs to go get help. So that's the problem. So seeing these things on Instagram and Facebook, and it does pose a little bit of a pause for me, because I I obviously feel like my particular situation was covert narcissistic abuse after the research that I did on it, but I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychologist, and my ex was never diagnosed. But he ticked almost all the boxes on that DSM-5. And I had 20 years of experience with this. So it's a really touchy subject because we have to be careful not to label everyone. But the thing is, you want to look at the traits overall, and you want to look at if the person is displaying a pattern of behavior. And that's the most important thing, because if one day I say something and I lied to you or gaslight you about something, but that just happened once, that doesn't make me a narcissist. That just makes me have a behavior that is similar to what narcissists do. It's the pattern of behavior over time, consistently, that causes the other person emotional trauma and damage. And that's the most, I think that's a big identifier here, is to make sure that it's a pattern and it's not just some like one-time thing.
Yeah, I kind of want to hammer in on that last thing you said, that is a pattern, because I have found, I've been in relationships with people who were highly toxic myself. I've been in relationships that were abusive, mentally, physically, sexually, all of that.
Right.
And, I think about the patterns in like those relationships that I was in. I think about even patterns in, I grew up in a stable 2-parent home, married parents, all of that. My parents have been married for nearly 40 years, but there were other family members in the environment who had like toxic relationships that I spent a fair amount of time around. And, you kind of normalize that when you have crazy in your family,
Yeah.
So like, I think about like my situation and like hearing about yours and like looking into your book and all. Growing up, did you see a lot of those patterns, a lot of those unhealthy relationship patterns?
For me personally, I didn't notice or think there was anything wrong with my childhood until I escaped my abusive marriage. And then I was able to look back and see some of the unhealthy things that I grew up in. I would have said I had the perfect childhood. I had 2 parents who were married up until I was probably a teenager, and was shocked when they told us they were getting divorced, because I never even saw my parents fight. But I've been since able to connect some dots to see some behaviors that weren't necessarily all that healthy, that caused me as a child to be impressioned to where, how do I say this? To where I don't want to, because I don't want to put blame on my parents, but that created an environment for me to be of a codependent nature. So having low self-worth about things to where I was seeking validation from other people. And so then when I was 19 years old and I went from living with my parents to living with my ex, my now ex, it was almost the perfect recipe to be abused, because I literally was looking for his validation. And growing up, I always felt like I had to achieve in order to be loved. And my parents were very loving, but it was a pattern of every time I did something really great or got an award or did something spectacular, I got showered with praise and love and acceptance. But if I was just being me and just doing normal stuff, that wasn't getting me anywhere. I wasn't getting anything. So walking into a relationship with someone who I believe to be highly narcissistic, it was then the perfect union, because I was constantly achieving, constantly trying to make him happy, constantly trying to up what I did the last time. And it was never, ever enough, because a narcissist, for them, whatever you do is never going to be enough to satisfy them. So yeah, now looking back, I can see those patterns, but at the time, obviously, I didn't think there was anything wrong with and I'm not even going to say there's anything wrong with it. It just, I think our programming and how that we're raised can always affect, and does affect, how we grow up and what our personality ends up being, and then affects our relationships in the future with other people.
You've mentioned twice that you were 19 when all this happened. And I know, like, again, for me, my dad was a preacher. I always felt like the church came first.
Wow.
And felt like I didn't get enough attention. So at a young age, I went out looking for attention. And
Right.
like dating at a really young age, I ended up in some unhealthy relationships. And that it wasn't until I got a little bit older and therapy, all that good stuff, you know,
Yeah.
that that I started to learn better. But I do feel like sometimes, especially these toxic partners, and I'm not even just saying men, because I've seen toxic and narcissistic women as well,
Right.
um, that there's a lot of like seeking out someone who is younger and grooming. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that, and I actually have seen this with my ex too, because he immediately got into a relationship with a female who is much, much younger, um, like 15 years younger than him, and is now engaged to another person who is probably 14 or 15 years younger. And I think the reason for that is because there's just not as much life experience when you're young. I mean, you don't maybe necessarily have as many relationships under your belt. You haven't seen or experienced as much. So it's easier than to manipulate someone who doesn't have that wisdom or I don't know, that clarity as far as what a healthy relationship is versus a non-healthy relationship. And so they tend to be targeted a little bit more. And I will say this, I think that especially when you're young, because I did say I was 19, like you, young, um, ended up in this toxic relationship. But I think that part of that was because of not understanding and being familiar with love bombing. And love bombing is one of those things that a lot of people don't even really think is a real thing because they think, well, it's good. Like showering someone with love and attention and praise and gifts and wonderful things. That how can that be a bad thing? And it isn't a bad thing unless it's actually used with an ill intention. And that ill intention is to trick you into believing that this is how the rest of the relationship is going to be. And don't get me wrong, there are probably a lot of people out there who are just kind-hearted, wonderful people who shower their significant others with love all the time. But when you're young and you believe Disney fairy tales and you believe these things that, oh, we're just going to live happily ever after. And, this person's sweeping me off my feet, then that's the way that the rest of our marriage is going to be, or the rest of our relationship. That's not reality. So had I known and had I been aware of what a healthy relationship looks like, what the signs of love bombing are, what to look out for and be wary of, I don't think I would have ended up in that relationship, even with having the low self-worth that I had and the need for validation. And I think the dream of having that relationship and the dream of being in this happily ever after and the belief in my heart that this is how it's supposed to be helped seal the deal, because I was trapped within a matter of months. And I thought, this person is my soulmate. I love this person with all my heart. So no matter what happened after that, no matter what he did for 20 years after that, I just forgave and, kept doing my own therapy, kept trying to figure out what was wrong with me, because why would I do anything different if I believed from the get-go that this was meant to be and this was my person and then we were soulmates. So I think that for me personally, if I had known about love bombing from the beginning, I wouldn't probably have ended up in that situation.
I'm glad you brought in love bombing because it brings me to a question I really wanted to ask you about.
Okay.
And so love bombing, for those of you who aren't familiar, this is when a person, you get into a relationship with them, and like Allison saying, they're showering you with gifts, they're giving you all these compliments. You're the best person in the world. You're just so special, so great. They've never met anyone like you, and the relationship is just moving just like a Disney movie. And
Mhm.
then all of a sudden they start pulling back a little bit,
Yep.
and they pull back a little bit more, and then they start to maybe nag or insult or put you down a little bit, and you're wondering like, what's wrong? Like, I'm doing something in this relationship, or something's happening. And then a lot of times you end up in these cycles where you start to think, okay, everything's going terribly, and then all of a sudden they're sweet again.
Yep.
And and they're awesome and it's amazing. And then you go through it again. And oftentimes even when they go back to their sweet stages, they're not as sweet as they were before. It's a little bit pullback each time. But it brings me to the question that I wanted to ask you, because your story's still evolving, but you managed to leave that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so many women who are trapped in these relationships. And I've even had situations where I've had women come to me and want to, pay me for their friends, bring their friend in to get coaching. And, I kind of have to gently explain that until she sees it herself, there's nothing I can say to her.
Yep.
And how do you start that process of understanding, like, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. I had a friend one time after my string of abusive relationships, I was trying to explain to her, like, these relationships were toxic. And she kind of laughed it off and said, we're all a little toxic, right? Like all of us are. And how do you start to get to that point where you're like, no, like, I know I'm not perfect. And I know there's always things I can do to be a better partner in a relationship, but this is not normal couples arguing or normal relationship conflict. This person I'm with is problematic. How do you get to that point?
I don't want to ruin my book for those of people who haven't read it, because it does tell you in there how I came to the realization about what was happening to me. But I think there are some other things that could be clues. And some of the things, because I could look back afterwards and think, oh, wow, I missed those clues. The feeling that everything's your fault. If you feel like everything's your fault, you have to remember this is a 2-person relationship. It's not realistic that everything would be one person's fault. That's just not reality. That's number one. When you feel like that you're in a constant brain fog, when you feel like that you can't think straight, that your memory is failing, that you are confused all the time, that's a really big indicator that something isn't right. And if someone is telling you that you need help and you're crazy and that you're the problem, that's also a huge clue. Because if you feel like that you're spinning your wheels and you're doing everything that you can do, you're walking on eggshells, you're trying not to mess up, you're trying to make sure the other person is happy all the time, you're doing things to go above and beyond, this is way out of the realm of just we're a couple who argues sometimes. And I can see that now I'm in a different relationship now, a healthy relationship now, and that we can have disagreements and we can have conversations, or we can even have arguments that aren't abusive, that aren't someone making you doubt your reality and doubt yourself and condescending and demeaning and making you feel like you have no self-worth. That is where the difference lies. A normal, healthy relationship doesn't make you feel like you are worthless and you should be on the same team. It should be, hey, there's a problem I'm having. Can we talk about it? Hey, this is an issue that I'm seeing. Can we have a discussion? Versus, you need to get your life together. You need to go to therapy. You need to go to the doctor. You need to be medicated. There's something wrong with you. In my case, my ex refused to go to therapy with me. He accused me of being crazy constantly. But when I said, will you go with me? Will you do marriage counseling with me? Absolutely not. He refused, because to him, I was the issue. He didn't need to go. And then I would go and I'd come back with all these great ideas that the therapist had told me and say, oh, she said that maybe for you, this would be good. And then he would make me stop going because he didn't like what he was hearing from the therapist. So then it would be like, oh, don't go back to see that person. She didn't know what she's talking about. Where did she even get her degree? Right. So it's important to understand and distinguish some major things. Are you feeling worthless constantly? Are you being demeaned? Are they condescending you? And do you feel like you're in a brain fog all the time? Are you confused? Are being accused of having a really bad memory, even though sometimes you're questioning, well, I really actually do remember that. That's a hallmark of abuse, because abusers really want to keep you in a state of confusion, in a state of inferiority, so that they maintain power.
I was thinking of one particular relationship I was in where, relationships are supposed to be, when conflict arises, it's supposed to be me and you versus the problem.
Right.
And I definitely felt like the relationship was me and him versus me,
Mm-hmm.
versus all the bad things about me.
Yes, that's exactly how I would have described it for myself. Exactly.
Especially too, growing up in a Christian background and all that. And I'm not trying to knock that. I am still a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, a lot of that, like, needing to be saved and all that, a lot of that talk kind of gets infused into these types of relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It does. I mean, everything, and this kind of crosses over into the coaching that I do, but everything that we experience from the day that we're born is programming, like a computer right out of a box, right? It doesn't have anything on it, and you program it, you tell it what to do. And that's basically what happens to us. And then we grow up and we believe all these things that our parents have taught us and society has taught us and friends and experiences on the playground or whatever. And we carry those with us throughout our whole lives. And then if we're just so unfortunate, we end up in a relationship with a toxic or narcissistic person, and then it begins all over again. And then we get more conditioning and more programming. And then our self-worth is completely shattered. So, that's a huge part of it. Like what you were saying, as far as like, you take them from where, what you learned in your childhood, and then you, move it into a relationship with someone, and it affects that relationship. But then if that person is a toxic person, a narcissistic person, they're going to be putting more and more and more of those, programming and condition types of beliefs onto you to keep you under control even more. So I think that's really important for people to recognize as well.
You mentioned being in a healthy relationship now, and
Mhm.
I think that that's awesome. I'm married myself,
Yeah.
and I see a lot of women give up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see these women who are very fortunate and very blessed. They've always had healthy relationship role models. They've been in, like, mostly decent relationships. They get married and all that. You
Yeah.
see women who, you see women like us who have, like, second chances and find healthy relationships. I also see women who, especially women who, like, have a family history of a lot of unhealthy relationships, and then they get into one or two themselves.
Mhm.
It becomes a men are trash. I'm going to stay single for the rest of my life. And talk to me about, like, your process a little bit. And yes, we don't want to give away the book too much, but
Mhm.
a little, like, in general, about being able to get to that place where you can even try again, like, even allow yourself to care again.
Right. And I see it all the time too, because people who come to me for coaching say things like, I can't trust anyone. I'll never trust anybody ever again. Like you said, all men are evil, men are trash, blah, blah, blah. Right. So they have their circumstances created these beliefs in them. And so then our beliefs cause our emotions and our behaviors. So if you believe all men are trash, or you believe all men are out to get you, or believe all men are horrible, you're not going to try to date someone. You're not going to try to go out and meet anybody, right? If you can't trust someone, you're not going to let somebody in and be vulnerable to them. But what is really the thing for me that helped me was that I needed to, because I was very skeptical too. And trust has been something I've really had to work on. And I've even had to work on it in the relationship. It wasn't like I got healed and then I started dating, right? I had to get into the relationship to know what actually needed to be healed. So for me, it's like, you can't really know what is going to come up, or, what kind of things are issues, unless you're in it and living it. How could I map that out? How could I say, okay, I'm going to make a list of all the things that I need to work on before I get into a relationship. I need to work on trust. I need to work on not being defensive. I need to work on, I don't know, I don't know, being not lying, because when I'm in a relationship with someone and then I lie and then it comes out that I've lied, then I know that's an issue I got to work on. But if you're not in the relationship, how do you even know that you need to work on that? Right. So those were things that I actually learned while I was in the relationship. The thing is, you've got to choose a person who understands the trauma that you've been in, who is patient, who is willing to help you and be on the same team. Because if you're not willing to be vulnerable to tell someone who you want to enter into a relationship with that this happened to you and this is your experience and you have a lot of triggers and you have a lot of trauma, if you can't be even vulnerable to say that to that person, how would you know if they would be able to support you? So for me personally, I felt like the number one thing I wanted to do was get rid of all of the things that my ex-husband put inside my brain. I didn't want to be triggered by stuff. I didn't want to always have that like sinking gut feeling every single time I got a text message. I wanted to get rid of that stuff. I didn't want to have to be triggered and feel awful all the time. But I knew that if I didn't get into another relationship, I wouldn't know the things I needed to get better. Like I didn't know that I was a defensive person until I got into my relationship. I didn't know that I had a habit of lying until I got into the relationship. And the reason why I had all those things was because of being in the toxic relationship that I was in for 20 years that carried over into the new relationship. But I was very transparent with my partner and told him that everything that happened, he knows my entire story front to back. He knows all the things that happened, and he's understanding and patient and willing to work with me, because I'm not just doing these things because I'm a bad person or, and I'm not trying to be better. So that to me, for someone who is feeling like they can't trust other people, or maybe you can't trust yourself, maybe it's much deeper. Maybe you're worried that if you end up in a similar situation that you won't make it, or that this will be the worst thing you've ever experienced in your life. So it's a matter of doing the self-work for yourself to do as much healing as you can, whether that's therapy or EMDR, meditation, like any of those things, or thought work coaching like I do. Do those things for yourself because you deserve it, to improve your self-worth, to help you heal. But to me personally, it's my opinion, I'm glad I was in the next relationship, because it helped me to learn the things that I actually needed to fix.
Yeah, I think that's so true, that we grow through other relationships. And,
Yeah.
I was actually having that conversation recently with a client of mine about how in some ways, like coaching and therapy and all, like obviously we agree that coaching is great and that everyone should go to it because we're coaches. But but you have to give yourself that patience and that grace to kind of understand that, like, when you're working with your coach, you're kind of in a dress rehearsal or practice if you're playing sports or whatever, and getting in the relationship is like the real game. And obviously things happen in the game that don't happen in practice.
I love that analogy. You're exactly right. I love that.
Being able to understand that, and giving yourself that grace to even know that, like, you practice these strategies and you're like, I got this. I'm so good at this. And then like an actual conversation happens and you're like, I don't got this. You're used to being like a people pleaser. You're used to like making others happy. It's hard to like fight that urge to, if I speak up, someone's going to be disappointed in me. If I speak up, they're not going to be happy.
Yep. I struggled with that personally too. And these are things that you might not even have awareness of or recognize until it comes up, or until someone confronts you with it. Like you're having a conversation with your mom and then you get really defensive and your mom's like, why are you being so defensive? And you're like, I was just protecting myself, so you don't actually, it's not like you can take a list and like work everything off the list of all the things that you're going to be prepared for in life, right? That's just not reality. Like you said, you have to do your best in what you do, and then just show up in the real game or the reality of the situation and do your best. And you're going to fall and you're going to fail and things aren't going to always be great. and you probably will be triggered and you'll probably break down and you'll probably have fights and arguments, but you just keep picking yourself back up and you keep trying again, because those people who you talked about earlier who just give up, there's a reason that they don't want to try anymore. And a lot of times it's because of the fear of getting hurt. It's the fear of having to repeat what they've been through in the past. And the reality is, the not trusting someone doesn't actually protect you, right? If you say, I don't trust you, that actually doesn't protect you, because trust, you could trust someone for 20 years. I trusted my ex-husband for 20 years and he completely shattered my trust. So just because you trust someone doesn't mean that trust can't be broken. So the biggest thing that you can do to help yourself is to get trust in yourself that you'll be okay, and that you'll be able to pick yourself back up, and that you'll be able to do what you need to do to heal, even if trust is broken. That's the most important thing.
I love what you do because I think all coaches, of course, it comes out of our desire. I became a dating coach because I was in trash relationships, and I really was like, whatever I can do in my little corner of the world, like I know I can't change everybody, fix everybody, but whatever I can do in my little corner of the world to make sure that like women don't repeat the same mistakes that I made, then that's what I'm going to do. So talk to me more about how you specifically help women, and how you say that like a lot of your coaching's informed by like your own healing process.
So the way that I approach is different from what you might see in other types of like therapy and stuff, because I know that everyone has the answers inside of them. And I know that, like you said, you can't control what happens outside of you. You can only control how you respond, and you can only control how you feel. Some people say, oh, you can't control how you feel. But if you get to the source of what you're feeling, your emotions, the source is always the thinking. And that's the approach that I take. The thoughts create the emotions create the habits and the behaviors. So if you grow up in a life where your parents are always saying something to you like, oh, you're such a klutz, and then you fall up the stairs and they say, oh, look, there goes the klutz again. And then day after day after day, you start believing it, right? You start believing that you're a very clumsy, klutzy person. And one day as an adult, you're out and about and someone runs into you with their shopping cart and you say, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm such a klutz, right? Your belief system has been creating your reality. What you think about becomes your reality. So in the healing work that I do, what I love to say is that I help people empower themselves. I don't empower anyone. I couldn't empower anyone. I help people empower themselves by getting to the source of the pain that they're feeling inside of them. And that is the thinking. Once we can be aware of our thoughts and how our thoughts are driving our emotions, we can flip it around. We can discredit those thoughts. We can show our mind some other possibilities. And when we do that, we rewire our thinking, just like that computer that I talked about in the beginning. That computer that's been programmed a certain way, we're just going to reprogram it. That's what we're going to do. So that's why in my coaching, it's not a one-time thing. It's over a 12-week period. So I go through with my clients and help them do this. And then in between, they do the work. They're writing things down. They're getting to the source and they're flipping it. And then the magic starts to happen and then they start to feel better. So it is about taking responsibility. It's about not responsibility for what someone else did to you. No, taking ownership of who you are inside of you so that you can create the life that you want for yourself. If you can see it, it can be yours. If you can envision the joy, the peace, the happiness, the self-worth, if you can envision it, you can have it. So that's how I operate.
I want you to leave everyone with two final pieces of advice. I was going to say one final piece, but two different audiences.
Sure.
So one piece of advice to women who are in, it doesn't have to be narcissistic. I think we talked about this earlier about like people love to put a label.
Yep.
And sometimes people like a big label so that everyone knows that they're truly hurting. Like this is serious.
Yeah.
But if you're just in an unhealthy relationship, what's your one piece of advice? And then a piece of advice for we mentioned it earlier, it's not you, but it's your sister, it's your best friend, it's your cousin who's in the bad relationship.
So the first thing that you mentioned was if you're in an unhealthy, toxic, narcissistic, whatever relationship that you're in, my first piece of advice would be to, and I hate to even give advice because I don't like to tell people what to do. People should do what they feel like they should do for them. But if you want to leave the relationship, if that's your desire, then my number one piece of advice is to plan. Planning is key. I can't emphasize it enough. If you do not have a good, solid plan, you might end up right back in that position. You might be right back in that abusive or unhealthy relationship again. Planning meaning, writing out all of the things that you need to do to get ready, having a place to live, having money or finances set up, because a lot of times if you're in an unhealthy relationship, someone else is in control of the money. Making sure that you have a good attorney and a good therapist. And literally, like, it took me probably 3 months to get a really good solid plan before I actually pulled the trigger and divorced my ex or filed for divorce. So if you're in the relationship and you want to exit it, then the number one thing I can say to do is actually start researching, get a good plan together, because if you don't have a really good plan, then when you do go to leave, your chances of staying gone for good are going to be lower, because you're not going to have the support. You're not going to have a place to live. You're not going to maybe have the money. You might end up having to go back because you don't have any resources. So the planning is going to be the most important thing for that. The other one that you had asked me was if it's your friend or someone else who's experiencing this. And I will tell you that I actually just made a post about this today on my Instagram, that my book can actually be really helpful for that, because it's a memoir. Like, it's a true story account of what it's like to go through this. And so many people have said things like, oh my gosh, I could have written this book myself. Like, this is literally my life. People have said that to me because I knew I couldn't be the only one. So all these themes are the same. So what you can do first and foremost, because you can't convince your friend to leave if your friend's not ready, just like you said. But the most important thing I can say is be there for them. Just be there, because your friend is probably going to not be that great of a friend. And here's why: because she's scared. She's afraid that her husband, boyfriend, significant other, girlfriend, whatever, is going to get mad, lash out, become abusive, be condescending, do whatever, any of those things. If she goes to hang out with you, if she's talking to you, if you're calling and saying, hey, let's go out, and she's saying, I can't, not today, or she's blowing you off, it's not about you. It's never been about you. It's about what's going on in her internal world. So my mom is a great example of this, and she's in my book, and she stayed right there. And I was not a good daughter. I rejected my mom. I pushed her away, all because my ex did not like my mom, did not want her coming around, chose his mom. Like Mother's Day, we saw his mom. We didn't see my mom. So she never gave up. She kept every opportunity she had. She was still there. Hey, you want to go out? And I'd say no. And she'd say, okay. And the next time she'd ask again, and I'd say no. And she'd say, okay. And she was patient, and she hung around, because here's the thing: when that person is ready, and when they do finally say enough is enough and I'm going to leave, they need someone there. So trying not to take it personally is going to be one of the bigger things that you can do. If you really love and care about someone, try not to take it personally, because if they're truly in a bad relationship with someone, it's not about you. It's about them self-preserving. It's about them maintaining sanity in their mind, maintaining emotional well-being, trying not to get in trouble, they're walking on eggshells. So just being there and never leaving, even if they reject you and reject you and reject you. You might not be able to do that, and that's a personal choice. But if you truly care about someone and you really do want what's best for them, just being there is really the best thing that you can do. I hope that helps.
No, I think that's awesome. And we could continue this conversation all day. And I
know.
want to invite everyone who's listening to continue this conversation. Allison and I are both on Instagram. Ask questions. Like we would love to keep this conversation going. So Allison, with that, how can people find you?
I am on Instagram, like you said, it's Allison K. Dagney. You can also find me on Facebook, and I have a really large Facebook group out there as well. And if you connect with me, I can invite you to that, where it's all about healing from toxic relationships after divorce, any sort of unhealthy sort of relationship that you're in that you want to heal from. And I also have a website. It's whentearsleavescars.com. And I have a lot of resources and tools and information out there too. So yeah, reach out to me, send me a DM or get in my Instagram messages. I'm happy to share all of what I've learned and anything that I can to help other people.
Allison K. Dagney, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks for, like you said, being willing to be vulnerable. It's not just in your relationship, which I'm glad, of course you are, but this is how we help other women who've been through what we've been through.
I agree. And you as well, because, once we've been through it, it's important to, kind of do what we can do to help other people. And that's my goal.
Okay. Again, thanks guys. Don't forget to tag us on Instagram and let us know what you think of this episode. Hey there. So you made it all the way to the end of the episode, which means I have two things to say. One, thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. And two, you like me. You really like me. So I would appreciate it if you would show that like by subscribing to this podcast so that more people can hear about it and enjoy it as much as you do. And if you want to know more about any of the links that I mentioned on this episode or any guests that I've had, be sure to go to KeishaRice.com/links. That's KeishaRice.com/links. I can't wait to talk to you again in the next episode. So see you then.